Hello, everyone, and welcome to the new and rebranded The Other Way podcast. Hello to any new listeners. Welcome. I'm your host, Kasha. And to any of my existing community members who listened to this pod while we were still Nourish, welcome back. I'm so excited to be here with you all and to be recording this episode. I know it's been a while. I took some time off in December to prep for this rebrand, to prep for the launch of my product, which I'm going to tell you about in a bit. And it's just been really great having a break and having some time off and having some time to reflect and really go deeper into things and be creative. But we have a lot to cover today. I'd say that the bulk of this episode is going to be an update episode. I'm excited to spend some time catching up with you, to share an update on the rebrand, the impetus around it, and a bit of a broader update around my life and new business, and share some 2024 intentions with you with some tips and guidance, some journaling prompts I'll throw in there at the end. If you're looking to set some goals yourself and could use some guidance on how to do that in a mindful, embodied way, I'll definitely include that. And I'm going to call out that the practices we'll dive into can be done any time of year. So if you're listening to this and it's late into whatever month of the year it could be, even another year, that's totally fine. So if you're new here and want to get a feel for me, this is the perfect opportunity to do so. And if you're an existing listener, I'm excited to bring you up to speed on what's been going on. So first things first, let's talk about the rebrand the other way. So for those of you who have been here for a while and know this podcast as Nourish, thank you so much for your support. I launched Nourish shortly after leaving Microsoft and after leaving my tech career when I was at the start of grad school studying Chinese medicine. And at the time, Nourish was primarily a podcast focused on the art and science of Chinese medicine applied to modern conditions. And it was really about ancient medicine applied to the modern world. But it really has expanded since then, along with my interests. So mindfulness has been a huge part of my evolution, and so has building a business. And I started to notice myself gravitating away from just health-related topics, which will certainly be part of the content here. But I found myself seeking and interviewing guests who were exploring topics beyond alternative health into alternative and uncommon approaches to business, mindfulness, lifestyle, and research, and really looked at things another way. So I wanted this podcast to be a better representation of what we cover here and what I want to cover more of. So my intention with The Other Way is to explore those uncommon, unconventional, or otherwise alternative approaches to life, business, and health. I'll continue to interview thought leaders, founders, spiritual teachers, experts in medicine, East and West. But more than that, I also intend to have it extend just beyond Chinese medicine, which had been my focus for a while. So the next change that I'm excited to introduce is seasonality. So I've been hosting this podcast for almost 2 years, posting religiously every week or every other week more so. And I had been doing that pretty much up until my break last month. And although that's definitely served its purpose, one of the things that I feel really called to, and that's a bit in line with my episode with Ann Woods, we had a series of 4 on seasonal living according to Chinese medicine. And kind of in line with that, I really wanted to bring back introduce some seasonality into my episodes and posting. So I really want to dive deep into themes, and I also want to have a little bit more flow in how and when I post with intentional breaks. And I will say that embodying this practice of more seasonal posting totally goes against what I feel in my type A perfectionist self way. This is something that self would not normally do. But my intuitive, more wise self, the self that honors the whole theme of doing things the other way, of doing things the way that feel good instead of the way you should do things, feels really called to this. And so I want to turn away from that conventional path and the advice of post more weekly and do so every single week, same time, whatever, and see what it looks like to have more seasonality and a bit more ebb and flow. Which definitely reminds me to remind you that if you haven't, subscribe to this podcast so that way you don't miss an episode when we do post those intentional, thoughtful episodes. So I think all of this segues really well into my next theme, which is I want to update you on my business and really the story of how it came into the world, because the evolution of my business has really been an evolution of self as well. And it's been brewing and gestating for almost a year silently behind the scenes. And this direction in my business has also represented a really powerful shift in my work, my life, and my spiritual practice, really. But before I dive into, the new business direction that I'm focused on and why that's relevant, I do want to walk you through a bit of context and background. So for those of you who have been listening for some time, I posted my January 2023 New Year episode. I shared some context around how I felt coming back from my New Year's retreat. I spent a week with Esselyn, with my husband, taking Deborah Eden Toll's mindfulness retreat, which was all about reflecting as we prep for the new year. And when I started the year, I was in a really liminal space. So a space of uncertainty. I was in transition. I was about to get married, and I was in the early stages of building a business in the tech wellness space. So something that was really tech heavy. It aligned with my background, but it also brought in wellness and spiritual wellness and the exploration of that. And at the time, though, as I was, starting the year, I found myself so uncomfortable in this uncertainty. And as someone who has really defined myself by controlling my circumstances and controlling where I am in work and life, I felt that this uncertainty and this time of transition was just really, really difficult for me. And especially the uncertainty around, I was starting this business. I had found a co-founder to work with, but I felt a lot of uphill battle here. I felt a lot of imposter syndrome. I felt a lot of kind of resistance to what I was working on. And it was definitely an uphill battle. And I found myself really, really struggling with that, struggling with a lot of the narratives that came up, that a founder should look like X, or, oh my gosh, I'm starting something new. I should be further along by now, or I'm so behind in life, or even I feel uncomfortable stepping into my marriage, not having my business completely figured out, especially as somebody who has always prided herself on being independent, being that type A Capricorn that has it figured out, being in this space of pursuing something new, but feeling a lot of struggle with it and not being sure if it's the right thing, pushing through it because, hey, like that is the thing that I'm meant to do. And being a founder is not meant to be easy. So just like push through it type of vibes. And so long story short, the start of 2023 was really aggressive for me. I pursued the tech platform that I was building at the time, even started fundraising, which was pretty much all systems go until my wedding, when I had to pause to fly out for the wedding. We were getting married internationally in Lake Como, Italy. Beautiful small ceremony, so unbelievably beautiful. And I remember at the time, as I was preparing for the wedding, my mindfulness teacher, Eden, had shared that I should really set aside some time to celebrate the transition. And even though I had time afterwards, I will share that fundraising and prepping for that and jetting off to your wedding while still sending emails, jet lagged, landing the next day is definitely not the transition that I wish I had going into it. And so, I don't think a lot of people talk about this because everyone just expects your wedding to be a stressful, overwhelming time. But I really encourage any bride-to-be, allow yourself to be in the vortex of transition and set aside more time than you expect up front and afterwards. we did have some time to go skiing with my family afterwards. And that space and time brought me so much clarity, I have to say. And so I think we need to allow ourselves time and space for transition because things shift. And I remember leaving from my business, being in that fight or flight survival mode of this new business that I was creating. And while I was in my post-wedding cocoon of presence and really more in tune with my body and how I was feeling, I had a very clear awakening moment that communicated to me that this was the wrong path for me. And even though the platform itself is one that I'm very passionate about to this day, it's a platform that really helps those who are spiritually minded find and discover community, connect with incredible facilitators, and really kind of support everyone from like an agnostic mindfulness practitioner through to a more esoteric practitioner find their group. Although I love that space and I still deeply believe in it, I had a very clear moment very shortly after my wedding that I was barking up the wrong tree. I was barking up a tree of building a business that required a lot of funding. I was barking up the tree of focusing my time on fundraising. And I felt like I was trading one boss for another. And frankly, I did not want to build a business that way, at least not upfront, right? Like that just wasn't the way I wanted to do it. And this was a really hard thing for me to admit because A, I have been pursuing this for the majority of my career. B, I had this co-founder I was already working on. I was pretty far along in the project. And to step away from that was so hard. And to even admit that to my network of incredible Silicon Valley tech entrepreneurs, I had a lot of shame with that, to admit that, hey, I'm not trying to, have my focus be fundraising and taking that path. And maybe there is another way of doing things. And so I share all of this because at the beginning of 2023 and the first half of the year for me was quite a struggle. And I want to acknowledge and celebrate, especially for anyone that is coming into this year feeling like, new year, new you. Like I have so much uncertainty and lack of clarity, may it be in relationship or at work or wherever in your life, that liminal space is great. It is a fertile ground. When I look back at that time now, I felt like I was spending so much time distracting myself from the quiet and discomfort that came with being in that uncertainty that it took me so much longer to find the answer that was true for me. And I remember having a similar experience years ago when I was in a relationship that wasn't right for me. And so even though we don't celebrate the liminal spaces, the transition spaces, they are so, so, so powerful. If you're transitioning from being single to being in a relationship to being married, made into mother, fertile, pre-menopause to perimenopause and menopause, all these transitions are so valuable, physical, mental, and emotional. Okay, so 2023 was a lot of that for me. And pivoting away from the business I was working on and finding myself again in a place of uncertainty, except now it wasn't uncertainty of if this is the right business for me or not. It was, what am I going to focus on? And I found myself really struggling with that. I knew that I was walking away from a business that wasn't right for me, but I didn't have a clear idea of what was going to be the next thing. And as someone who wrote detailed goals for my life since I was 19, I was no longer climbing the ladder, no longer dating to find that partner. And I found myself really, really struggling with embracing that unknown. And all of these massive shifts and changes, they felt so paralyzing in my body. I found myself questioning who I was, what was my path, and feeling a lot of shame around experimenting. And also a lot of shame around the privilege to be able to experiment. I'd spent a lot of time saving up and then finding myself in this uncertain place. It's kind of like that narrative of, hey, you're in your 30s, you should have it figured out by now, like stop playing around. I had these voices that were really communicating that to me internally, I mean. And so without that very clear, this is who I am, and with defining who I am is what I do kind of mentality, without the this is what I do, I felt so empty. And so shortly after what was the most amazing and beautiful transition of marriage, I fell into a very deep depression. So this was late April of May into May last year. And I found myself just really experiencing these intense lows and uncertainty and questioning and self-loathing that spiraled into this really never-ending low depressed state. And I want to offer trigger warning for those out there, but this was very low. And I feel deep empathy and compassion for anyone in that space, because I never really understood conceptually what it's like to experience this kind of low where it feels like something you can't control. It's like a cloud you cannot control. I could feel it coming on throughout the month, and I cannot positively affirm or work out myself out of this space. Like no amount of endorphins or positive affirmations or meditations were helping me. And, I did read that states of transition can kind of help bring this on. I have a lot of compassion for women who suffer from postpartum depression, obviously something I've never struggled with myself, but conceptually, I can understand that when you go through this massive transition, there isn't anything that prepares you for the identity shift. And so again, may it be a loss of job, a loss of relationship, or the start of a new state, or the birth of a child, these massive transitions do bring on pivotal experiences of, kind of uncertainty and a very limbo-like state of identity. And so I think not a lot of people talk about the flip side of things like that. Like we all know that breakups are depressing, but do we, can we conceptualize what it's like to be changing careers and that uncertainty to bring on depression as you question your identity, or even getting married to bring on like a post-marriage kind of state of sadness? And it's not sadness for getting married, but it's genuinely just the sadness of, grieving the person who you were as you step into this new, beautiful life. And there's this amazing therapist, Cheryl Paul, who actually speaks to this. And she has this beautiful quote. Sometimes it's said that the spiritual path is essentially about learning to die. It's also about learning to be born. And I just think that quote is so beautifully said. And it's so valuable for us to acknowledge transition, and not just the celebration that can come with it, but also the grief, and acknowledging that the grief can be normal. Of course, I did not have this perspective at the time. At the time, I felt a lot of grief and guilt and shame and uncertainty to be newly married and to be feeling this kind of unhappiness felt surreal. And I felt like there was something wrong with me for feeling this. And so I really felt like I had two options. Well, actually, I felt like there was really only one option. I couldn't change the feelings. And so I went really deep into my meditation practice to try and find some way to accept the pain. I started meditating daily. I went to the SF Zen Center weekly, and then I ended up on a 6-day retreat at a Zen center in Big Sur that completely changed my life. The retreat was at Tassajara, and we meditated for several hours a day, along with meditative work and just a lot of time of self-reflection and time with community. And I think this practice of slowing down, reconnecting with my body, and really having this sense of presence just shifted something within me. And I left with this profound awareness of my intuition, my physical cues, And I started to notice that I had a sense of trust and confidence in myself that stemmed from a deeper place. It was a more intuitive place. It was this still small voice, as another teacher of mine, Sarah Von Stover, likes to say, that was coming up. And I felt like I heard that voice. And I had this presence and awareness that I continued to cultivate long after the retreat. I meditated every day, and I started to notice that, the practice that I had started to accept and live with my depression was something that helped me start to transmute it. And the awareness that I brought to the symptoms as well, and the kindness that I brought to accepting these states of mind that came on, I also just noticed that awareness helped me recognize that the symptoms came on during certain times of the month, certain times of my cycle. And so the meditation and these tools for self-awareness not only helped ease the symptoms that I was experiencing, but it also helped me reconnect to my body and discover new patterns that were present in my body in a whole new way. And this just pulled me down the rabbit hole. I found myself going deeper into exploring how my cycle was influencing my mood, my energy, my creativity. I started to learn first and foremost from listening to my body, but even that act of learning to tune into my body while still going to work every day and doing all these like mind heavy things was a challenge. So I really leaned into allowing my cycle and the ebbs and flows of my cycle to be these cues for presence and for awareness and for tapping into and asking what my body needed. Slowly but surely, I found that adjusting my pace or my diet or my movement or even my mindfulness practice to honor these cyclical changes instead of just ignoring them or being completely disconnected from them, they helped me go deeper into understanding and connecting to my body on a deeply personal level and to cultivate that sense of self that I had started to feel so disconnected to during all these transitions and all these ebbs and flows and all of this period of grief even. And this just lit a fire within me. I don't think I've shared this broadly, but I was diagnosed with PMDD. And in addition to that, I also learned a couple of months ago that I have endometriosis. And for many years, I had lived with this condition and I really fought against it. Endometriosis is a condition where the uterine lining extends past your uterus and it results in horrible cramps, nausea, and for some, this pain can be cyclical or constant. And something like 1 in 10 women have it, but that stat is probably much larger even because a lot of women are never really diagnosed with endometriosis. For me, it shows up as crippling cramps and fatigue. And the cramps are so bad that, I've missed flights because of them. Even with drugs, I need a heating pad and a day or two off. I've taken birth control before, but I've had all sorts of symptoms related to that. That's an episode for another day. So I've been without birth control. And fundamentally, I feel like there was this point where I started to recognize my pain as a sign that I didn't want to ignore as opposed to something that I wanted to mask with drugs. And so I've chosen to honor and tune into my cycle instead of fighting against it. And for me, this really looks like step 1, an experiential awareness. But step 2, I really went down the rabbit hole of understanding how our hormones affect our mood, our energy, creativity, muscle building, and more. There's some remarkable research out there that speaks from everything from the influence our hormones have on muscle building to insomnia and mood. And I found myself just experiencing both awe and sadness that this knowledge is something that I'm only now discovering at the time I was 34, now I'm 35, right? And, yes, I knew that every month my period came and it was an extremely painful thing. And, in my earlier years, I found a lot of shame around it too, but I didn't quite understand the intricacies of the almost like roller coaster wave that our hormones go through, or the fact that unlike men, our hormones, they cycle over 28 days. So it's not like you bleed and then, it's this one random 7-day thing that happens and then your hormones are steady and stable for the rest of the month. No, like from day 1 through to when you bleed again, that experience is not static. It is changing constantly and evolving from when you start your period until you bleed again. And the male testosterone, by the way, on the other hand, hooks up to more of a circadian rhythm. So women, as I described, follow a 28-day cycle approximately, which is known as an infradian rhythm. But the male testosterone cycle refreshes every 12 minutes or so, with like a full cycle every 24 hours. So the female rhythm, the feminine rhythm, is really kind of aligned with nature. You can imagine like the low of winter, the growing period of spring, a peak in summer, and then the dip into autumn before winter again. But much like our seasons, this rhythm is largely ignored. We don't really acknowledge the shifts that happen in nature, most of us anyway. I know that I haven't for a really long time. I try to produce the same in the dead of winter as I do in the height of spring, or at least I feel like we're expected to. Time doesn't slow, but female time is different. And so this really inspired me to investigate and explore what it would look like to create tools designed for women, designed with our hormones in mind, honoring our transitions, merging both the wisdom of science with the wisdom of ancestral traditions from different cultures to create tools that function in our modern world, but help us move from our heads into our bodies. And this is what I've been working on for the past month, 6 or so, designing, user testing, and now finally bringing to market our first product, Inflow Planner, which, as the name suggests, is a planner designed for women, rooted in our cyclical time, but personalized to start on day 1 of our cycles. And the planner guides you through every day of your cycle with tips for nutrition, movement, and mindfulness, while also allowing you to plan and set goals. So it really balances that yin and yang energy of being with doing. So this is the first product that we've created under the brand of my company, Inflow, and this is what I've been heads down on for the past 6 months. So I'm so excited, so nervous to be putting this out into the world, but I felt like sharing some of this context is important because may it be one woman who is inspired by this to attune to her body in a different way, or, millions of women who feel inspired to make changes because of concepts like these. Just putting the information out there for me has been so helpful to consume some of it. In our Western culture, we tend to honor and celebrate the productive, symbolic, masculine energy, the yang energy, and we forget the energy of rest, of winter, of the softness that is inherently feminine. And we very often ignore the transitions of the seasons. And I am for sure tend to be by default as a type A, I tend to be the first person who ignores that because I'm so focused on the end goal. And I've been so disconnected from that. And I leave this other energy, this feminine yin energy behind. And so this planner is really something I wish had existed to balance both that yang, productive, goal-oriented energy with the more feminine, yin, restful energy. And the last thing I want to call out, because it is really important. Now, I mentioned that we user tested this planner with dozens of women. It took over 4 months to get the design right. And one of the things that became very obvious in this process was that a lot of women who desired the benefits we talked about didn't have a regular cycle. This could be because they had their uteruses removed, never had a uterus, or are on birth control, but they identify with this feminine flow. So if this is you, I want you to know you're not alone. I would say at least 50% of the women we spoke with fell into this category of, they do not bleed regularly, or they knew a woman who fell into that category and they asked on her behalf. And so in honor of these beautiful women, I want to call out that this planner and every other product that we bring into the world is designed for women who bleed and those who don't. And it is so important to me to acknowledge that. So for women who don't bleed, you can follow the symbolic cycles of the moon, the actual cycle of the moon, which is symbolically feminine in nature. Whew. Okay, well, that was a lot. If you're still here, thank you. And so just to recap, it has been a meaningful year. And as I look into 2024, I find myself really, celebrating the woman that I've become. I read through my goals last year, and my intention for the year was to, quote, hold hands with the one who is terrified and courageously step forward. And I feel really proud to say that I did that. And as I look into 2024, I'm so excited for what's to come, terrified as well. But I also am looking forward to doing things the other way this year. And I feel like I've been on this roller coaster of comparison and evaluating where I am compared to others and looking at how I should do things. And I realized that if those things don't resonate with me, that instead of looking at them, I should be looking at my internal compass. And I feel like that internal compass that I've cultivated just screams louder now. And I want this podcast and this space and this brand to be a place for others who want to cultivate that compass for themselves and who are seeking the other way in whatever shape or form that may take. Now, to wrap, I wanted to circle back and share that I promised at the start of this episode to give you all some prompts for self-reflection. And so if you feel called to kind of reflect a bit before setting goals for 2024 in an intentional and embodied way, this can be done at any time of year, by the way. So it's a practice that we've introduced actually in the Inflow Planner every cycle. So be gentle with yourself. Doesn't have to be the start of the year. It doesn't have to dictate the rest of your life. But I invite you to test it out if you want to take a moment to just tap into what is true for you and start to cultivate a voice that comes from within. Okay, so let's take a deep breath. And I invite you to take out your journal and start by drawing a big circle on it and then split that circle into 8. So when you look at it, your circle should look like a pie, 8 slices. So as you're drawing that, I want to share some context that the intention of this exercise is to start to bring awareness to all facets of who we are as human beings and to start to bring non-judgmental, honest awareness as to how we feel in these different areas of our lives. Because I'm not just the Kasha at work or the Kasha in my marriage or the Kasha friend. There's just so much more to my multidimensional being. And this exercise intends to help bring awareness to that. So you should be looking at a circle with 8 pie slices. And I invite you to start to label each slice. Health, family and friends, romance, personal and spiritual growth, fun and recreation, physical environment, business/career, and finances. Now, once you've labeled each slice, and if you want to change the names to make them work for you, please do. If there's another name you want to use for any of the categories or if there's anything missing. Now, I invite you, once you've labeled them, to take a moment and fill in each of the slices. Color them in to fullness, where fullness represents your satisfaction in the category and emptiness represents perhaps not as much satisfaction. Another way to say that is the center of the circle is 0, the outside of the circle, the edge of the circle is 10. And so if you fill up the entire pie, you feel a 10 out of 10 satisfied with that category. And I invite you to really just use your intuition here. Don't overthink it. Go with your gut instinct and just start to fill in the pie slices to represent how satisfied, how complete do you feel in this area. And you can go ahead and pause this podcast if you need more time. And when you're done, I invite you to look at the circle, and you can write down these questions if you want to journal on them later. But I want you to look and ask yourself, what are the fullest and the emptiest pie slices? Which of the categories are full and which ones are empty? How do you feel in your body looking at this pie? And what are the thoughts coming up for you as you look at them? Label them. From here, I invite you, in looking at where you are and how this feels in your body, to create a vision for your life. It can be a year from now or 5 years from now if a year feels impossible to imagine, because I know sometimes it can if you're in limbo and it's unknown. But of course, I hope my story has perhaps provided some hope for those of you who might feel in limbo, because anything can change. But I invite you to map out a story for yourself in first person. What would a complete vision look like? Touching on each of the categories in the pie, but also touching into how it would feel in your body to feel complete in these areas. How would it feel to feel more full, and maybe not even 100% complete in each category, because maybe it requires lowering one of the very full categories to lift the other one up, right? What would it look like to have that balanced version of your life, that vision of yourself? For me, it was amazing doing this exercise. I did a version of this while I was on retreat with Sarah Von Stover in early January. And I had come into the retreat looking for some spiritual and business guidance. That was the theme. But I was really focused on some major business goals. And I was completely disconnected from my body as I imagined them. I was like, okay, XXX goal in my business. And that was the main thing. But when I really investigated, I noticed that my spiritual path was very low. And if I really zoomed out and thought about fun and recreation and health, and I looked at those categories, I realized that even though my business life was feeling fulfilled, I didn't want to trade those off with the other areas of my life that were important to me. And I noticed, as I reflected deeper, that I was bringing in a lot of patterns from when I worked in the tech world and how I worked that felt completely unsustainable. And so what had happened is I started to envision this future vision for myself. I found myself framing things in a way that felt spacious in my body, that felt aligned and really felt intentional in a sense. And I want to give you a very specific example of that. So for me, it's so easy to go into perfectionist mode and focus on doing all the things right, like executing the perfect social media strategy, let's say, for my business. But if I'm really being honest, if I root deeper into my mindfulness practices, I'm noticing that for me, at my highest, most embodied self, I actually want to spend less time on social, and I want to not actually create as much content there because I don't want to take other people's time away from their body and their relationships and their life and give their life force to more time on social. And so this brings a whole new question up into the world. My vision has become presence and business success and abundance and impact, but in a way that feels intentional and perhaps isn't following the, kind of common path of posting on social all the time. And so this is exactly what I mean by forging your own vision on your own path on your own terms, even if those terms go against the popular status quo. So anyway, that is definitely one of my questions for 2024. And I invite you to take some time after this podcast to noodle on these questions, look into what calls your heart and where you might be feeling hesitation as well towards something that calls, but you might feel uncomfortable pursuing because that very thing might be the thing that's meant for you, but kind of standing behind a lot of muck, or a lot of fears, maybe some shame. But I invite you to first start by naming it, by naming what that vision could look like for you, and then seeing what comes up. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I hope you enjoyed it. I'm so excited to be back. Our next season will be focused on all things woman, from hormonal health with incredible OBGYNs, to fertility, to feminine spirituality, to Chinese medicine and hormonal health, to healing the witch wound, and more. I'm so excited to bring it to all of you. And as a final note, if any of you are interested in learning more about cyclical living or inflow, you can find us over at inflowplanner.com, where you can sign up for our free newsletter. It is either cycle synced or moon synced, your choice. It's personalized. You can get it every single month with personalized wisdom. And if you're interested in the planner, please use code podcast10, all lowercase, to get 10% off our products. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'm so happy to be back. Welcome to The Other Way, and I'll see you next time.